Before we begin, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood at the grave of the person you loved the most, only to find out you never really knew them at all? That moment when your world collapses, not because they died, but because of the truth they left behind. This is not just a story, it's my life. And everything changed at my husband's funeral. If you've ever been betrayed in silence, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The day of William's funeral was gray, in a way that didn't feel like weather. It felt personal. The kind of sky that presses down on you, reminding you how alone you are, even when you're surrounded by people. I arrived at the church early, too early. I had spent hours choosing what to wear. Dark, conservative, respectful. The widow, that was who I was now. For 27 years, I was William's wife. Not a glamorous life, no country clubs or penthouses. Just quiet evenings, holidays with just the two of us, a few vacations every now and then. We didn't have children. I couldn't. And William never pressed me for it. He said I was enough. He said that often. He also said he had to travel for work. For 6 months out of every year, he worked in another state. Logistics and consulting, he told me. Corporate contracts. He hated technology, avoided phones, said he was old-fashioned. I believed him. When I stepped inside that church, I didn't expect to see unfamiliar faces filling the pews. I assumed they were from his work, friends I'd never met, but something felt off. People weren't looking at me with sympathy. They were looking at me like I didn't belong there. Then I saw her, a woman around my age standing stiff at the front, dressed in black like me, but with a grief that was angry, not broken. Beside her, 2 adults, a man in his 30s, a woman not much younger. They looked at me as if I were poison, and I didn't understand why. Not until the service ended. I was walking toward the exit when I heard the voice, sharp, male, loud enough to turn heads. Unbelievable. She has the nerve to show her face here. I froze, turned. The man, one of the grown children, was pointing at me. His mother, the other woman, grabbed his arm, but it was too late. The words were spilling out. You ruined our family. You were nothing but a mistress, and now you want pity? Mistress? Laughter, scoffs, murmurs spread like wildfire. I couldn't breathe. I looked at the woman. Her eyes weren't confused. They were full of pain. She knew who I was. She knew, and yet I had no idea who she was. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My legs carried me out of the church, my heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear the world around me anymore. Later that night, I sat alone on the floor of my living room. Lights off, shoes still on. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I was frozen in a kind of shock that made time slow down. William had a wife, another wife, children, a life. The 6 months away each year, that was them. And me? I wasn't the wife. I was the other woman. The thing is, I had no idea. And somehow, that made it even worse. Because now, I wasn't just grieving a husband. I was grieving a life I never really had. And everyone thought I had known all along. The silence in my house was no longer peaceful. It was accusing. I wandered from room to room like a stranger in my own life, touching things that once held comfort. The smell of William's cologne still lingered faintly on the collar of the jacket hanging by the door. I should have gotten rid of it. I couldn't. Everywhere I turned, his ghost mocked me, not in anger, but in secrets. 27 years, a life I thought we built together. Holidays, birthdays, wedding anniversaries. All of it now felt like a stage play, because while I was writing love notes and planning meals for his return, he was holding someone else's hand in another state, celebrating another child's birthday, kissing another woman goodnight. And yet, I loved him. That's what made the betrayal feel like it carved through bone. I sat on the couch, clutching our wedding photo. I studied it for answers I knew I wouldn't find. Had there been signs? The late-night calls he took outside? The suitcase he never let me pack? Was it really possible that I had chosen not to see? My phone buzzed. It was a message from a mutual friend, or rather someone I thought was a friend. All it said was, "Saw what happened at the funeral. I can't believe you'd do that to his real family. Don't contact me again." Real family. Those words sliced through me sharper than anything at the funeral. It didn't stop there. That night, I discovered a string of posts circulating online. Photos from the service, my face blurred but recognizable. The mistress who showed up in black, one caption read. She lived off his money while he was dying. Another said she was just waiting for him to die so she could cash in. I felt sick. My email inbox overflowed with hate. Messages calling me a liar, a thief, a snake. Some from people I hadn't spoken to in years, others from strangers. No one asked me what I knew. No one cared. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at the kitchen table staring at the floor, sipping tea I couldn't taste. By morning, I was numb. And still, a part of me clung to the smallest thread of hope. Maybe this was all some misunderstanding. Maybe Helena had misunderstood William. Maybe those weren't his children. Maybe. But when I finally looked at our financial records, the truth hardened. There were flights. Every 6 months, exactly on schedule. Regular wire transfers. A second health insurance policy. Rent paid on a home I'd never seen. Every lie was now backed by a paper trail. I felt like a fool. A woman over 50, mocked online, left with no one to defend her, no children of her own, no siblings, no family left to turn to, just me, and the ghost of a man who had loved me quietly while building a louder life elsewhere. I started locking the doors more often, jumping at knocks. At the grocery store, I felt eyes on me. Whether they were actually watching or not, I didn't know. But paranoia had planted roots. I walked with my head down, like a criminal. Sometimes I wondered if this was punishment. Was I so desperate to believe in love that I let it blind me? Was the comfort of our routine so soothing that I chose ignorance over suspicion? Or was I truly just a victim of a man's double life? I didn't have the answers. Not yet. But I knew one thing. The Margaret who smiled through pain, who stayed quiet to be polite, who trusted too easily, that woman had been buried right alongside William. The woman left behind? She was about to find out what it really meant to live in the aftermath of someone else's lies. The day of the will reading felt like walking into a courtroom where everyone already believed I was guilty. I almost didn't go. I paced around my house for an hour, keys in hand, coat draped over the back of a chair. I kept thinking, what's the point? Whatever William left, it wouldn't matter. Nothing could undo what he'd done. But part of me needed to hear it. I needed to know if he at least acknowledged me in some way. I needed a reason, a fragment of closure. The lawyer's office was downtown, in a cold brick building that smelled like dust and legal tape. I arrived last. The room was already full. Helena sat with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, flanked by her 2 adult children. Their children. I hadn't even learned their names yet. To me, they were still the son who yelled at me and the daughter who wouldn't look me in the eye. They didn't acknowledge me when I walked in. I sat alone in the back corner, clutching my purse like it was a shield. The lawyer, an older man in a tan suit with weary eyes, cleared his throat and began. He spoke plainly, without drama. William's estate was significant. Multiple properties, investment accounts, retirement funds, stock portfolios. I knew some of this, not the scope, but I knew we'd lived comfortably. William was always frugal, always talking about saving for later. I just didn't know that later came with a landmine. He began listing assets. A house in New Jersey, left to Helena, a small trust for the daughter, another for the son. I thought, okay, that makes sense. They were his kids. But I braced myself, waiting for my name to appear next, and then it did, for everything else. Margaret Turner is named the sole beneficiary of the remaining estate, the lawyer read, including but not limited to the following: the marital home in Connecticut, all retirement accounts, investment portfolios, and personal savings, effective immediately. The room went silent. I didn't even breathe. Then I heard it, the sound of a chair scraping against tile, and a gasp that broke into a choked, "What?" It was Helena's son. He stood, face flushed red with fury, pointing at me like I'd just robbed them at gunpoint. She knew. She had to have known. You don't give someone everything unless they're in on it. The lawyer raised his hand to calm the room, but it didn't matter. Chaos had already been unleashed. "You think we're just going to let you walk out with everything?" The daughter spat at me. "He was our father. You were just his distraction." I wanted to scream. I didn't ask for any of this, but I couldn't even find my voice. My cheeks burned. My throat felt like it had swallowed sandpaper. I opened my mouth, tried to say something, anything, but Helena's eyes locked with mine before I could speak. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't crying. She just looked hollow, and that hurt more than anything, because in that moment, I saw my own face reflected in hers. We were both betrayed, but somehow I was still the one painted as the thief. I stood, legs shaking beneath me. The room pulsed with tension. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I never knew." No one answered. No one believed me. And so, I walked out of that office, out of the wreckage of William's 2 lives, out into a world where now I wasn't just a widow. I was the woman who stole everything, the stranger, the villain in someone else's story. And yet, I had never felt more alone in mine. I didn't open the front door for 2 days after the reading of the will. The outside world had turned into something hostile. I knew I wasn't imagining it. The glances at the grocery store, the way neighbors avoided eye contact, the 2 women whispering by the post office as I walked past. My name wasn't just being spoken, it was being smeared. The local paper ran a piece, "Secret Wife Inherits Fortune After Businessman's Death." It didn't mention my name directly, but everyone in town knew who it was about. The timing, the details, the implication. It was enough. Inside my own house, I couldn't find peace either. Every corner reminded me of William, his slippers by the back door, his toothbrush still in the bathroom. I should have thrown it out. I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the kitchen staring at a folder filled with bank statements, legal documents, and property titles, all now under my name. Millions. That word didn't even feel real. When we were together, William never lived extravagantly. He liked simple things. He'd clip coupons and complain about wasteful spending. We had no luxury cars, no designer furniture. But apparently, while he was preaching frugality, he was building an empire. And now all of it was mine. But I didn't feel rich. I felt contaminated. The money didn't comfort me. It haunted me. Every dollar was a reminder that I didn't truly know the man I shared a bed with. Every asset felt like it came from a lie. I hired a lawyer, not because I wanted to fight anyone, but because I had to make sure it was real. That William hadn't manipulated the documents while impaired. That I hadn't somehow unknowingly committed fraud just by existing. The lawyer confirmed it all. William had made the changes a year before his death, while fully coherent. The paperwork was airtight. The decision had been his. But why? Why would he leave me everything, knowing it would tear his other family apart? Knowing I'd become the target of their rage? I couldn't ask him now. But the silence he left behind screamed louder with each passing day. What made it worse was the pressure building outside the legalities. Helena's son emailed me directly, furious, unhinged. He called me a fraud, a parasite. He accused me of manipulating a dying man. He threatened to go public with everything, sue me for inheritance theft, even hinted that I'd driven William to the grave with stress. Helena's daughter wasn't much better. She posted on social media about me constantly, sometimes vague, sometimes explicit. She called me that woman who hid in plain sight and preyed on a broken marriage. Her followers believed every word. People I'd never met sent me private messages telling me to give the money back, that I didn't deserve it, that I should be ashamed. The worst part? A small part of me did feel ashamed. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I had benefited from someone else's lies. One night, unable to sleep, I sat on the back porch watching the wind stir the trees, and I said it out loud for the first time. I don't want this. The house, the cars, the money, the lawsuits, the silence. I didn't want any of it. I wanted my life back. The simple one. The one where I still believed in my husband, where my world made sense. But that life was dead, and in its place, I was left holding the ashes of a man who loved me and betrayed me, who chose to protect me financially, but not emotionally, who lived 2 lives so cleanly that even in death, he managed to destroy both. And now, I was alone with the fallout, alone and hated. And no amount of money in the world could make that feel less heavy. I didn't plan to reach out to Helena. Not at first. Part of me hoped she would contact me, to scream, to ask why, to accuse me to my face instead of through lawyers and online posts. But she didn't. So after another week of silence, and of waking up with my stomach in knots, I made the decision. It wasn't courage, it was desperation. I found a neutral spot, a small cafe halfway between our towns where no one knew either of us. I sent her a message, polite, careful. I told her I didn't want a confrontation. I just wanted to talk, for both our sakes. To my surprise, she replied within an hour. Tomorrow at 10. Don't be late. I barely slept that night. When I arrived, she was already seated. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes. Her hands folded tightly in front of her, like she was holding herself together through sheer will. I hesitated for a moment before sitting. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just stared at me with a tired intensity that made it hard to breathe. I opened my mouth, but she spoke first. Did you love him? The question hit me like a slap. I didn't expect that to be her first words. I thought she'd ask how long I knew, why I didn't walk away. But no, just that. Did I love him? Yes, I said softly. I did. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes filled for a moment, then blinked clear again. He told me you were a girlfriend, she said. One of many before we married. I asked once if you two ever reconnected. He laughed, told me not to worry. She sipped her coffee, her hands shaking slightly. He lied to both of us. For over 2 decades, 25 years of scheduling birthdays around business trips, 25 years of watching my kids wait by the window every June, knowing he wouldn't be back until Christmas. I couldn't speak. You know what hurts the most? She continued. Not that he left everything to you, not even that you didn't know about us. It's that, for all these years, I thought I was the only one being tolerated. But turns out, we were both being kept. The word sat heavy between us. Kept. I nodded, slowly. I used to imagine our future, I said quietly. Sitting on the porch together, old and tired, watching the seasons go by. I thought we had time. She let out a bitter laugh. Time. That man divided every ounce of his time like a chessboard. Holidays were always the hardest. And now? Now my children hate me because I didn't fight harder. They think I let this happen, that I wasn't enough. I looked up. Helena, I swear to you, I didn't know. Not 1 minute. If I had, you would have left? She asked. Not accusatory, just curious. I hesitated. I don't know. I want to believe I would. But 27 years is a lot of memories to erase. She nodded again, slowly. Same. We sat in silence. 2 women, side by side, nursing identical wounds carved by the same man. Eventually, she pulled a worn envelope from her purse. He left this in our safe, a copy of his original will. Before he changed it, she slid it across the table. In it, she had been the sole beneficiary. I think he knew he was dying, she said. And I think, somewhere, he believed he had to choose. Maybe he thought leaving everything to you would make up for something. Maybe it was his idea of love. I stared at the paper. My name wasn't even on it. I didn't ask for the money, I said. I still don't know what to do with it. She looked at me, softer this time. Neither do I. We left the cafe without a handshake. No hugging, no closure. But as I walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace, not forgiveness, but understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step toward something that resembled healing. I didn't plan to reach out to Helena. Not at first. Part of me hoped she would contact me, to scream, to ask why, to accuse me to my face instead of through lawyers and online posts. But she didn't. So after another week of silence, and of waking up with my stomach in knots, I made the decision. It wasn't courage. It was desperation. I found a neutral spot, a small cafe halfway between our towns, where no one knew either of us. I sent her a message, polite, careful. I told her I didn't want a confrontation. I just wanted to talk, for both our sakes. To my surprise, she replied within an hour. Tomorrow at 10. Don't be late. I barely slept that night. When I arrived, she was already seated. No makeup, dark circles under her eyes, her hands folded tightly in front of her, like she was holding herself together through sheer will. I hesitated for a moment before sitting. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just stared at me with a tired intensity that made it hard to breathe. I opened my mouth, but she spoke first. Did you love him? The question hit me like a slap. I didn't expect that to be her first words. I thought she'd ask how long I knew, why I didn't walk away. But no, just that. Did I love him? Yes, I said softly. I did. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes filled for a moment, then blinked clear again. He told me you were a girlfriend, she said. One of many before we married. I asked once if you two ever reconnected. He laughed, told me not to worry. She sipped her coffee, her hands shaking slightly. He lied to both of us. For over 2 decades, 25 years of scheduling birthdays around business trips. 25 years of watching my kids wait by the window every June, knowing he wouldn't be back until Christmas. I couldn't speak. You know what hurts the most? She continued. Not that he left everything to you. Not even that you didn't know about us. It's that, for all these years, I thought I was the only one being tolerated. But turns out, we were both being kept. The word sat heavy between us. Kept. I nodded, slowly. I used to imagine our future, I said quietly. Sitting on the porch together, old and tired, watching the seasons go by. I thought we had time. She let out a bitter laugh. Time. That man divided every ounce of his time like a chessboard. Holidays were always the hardest. And now? Now my children hate me because I didn't fight harder. They think I let this happen, that I wasn't enough. I looked up. Helena, I swear to you, I didn't know. Not 1 minute. If I had, you would have left? She asked. Not accusatory, just curious. I hesitated. I don't know. I want to believe I would, but 27 years is a lot of memories to erase. She nodded again, slowly. Same. We sat in silence. 2 women, side by side, nursing identical wounds carved by the same man. Eventually, she pulled a worn envelope from her purse. He left this in our safe, a copy of his original will. Before he changed it, she slid it across the table. In it, she had been the sole beneficiary. I think he knew he was dying, she said. And I think somewhere, he believed he had to choose. Maybe he thought leaving everything to you would make up for something. Maybe it was his idea of love. I stared at the paper. My name wasn't even on it. I didn't ask for the money, I said. I still don't know what to do with it. She looked at me, softer this time. Neither do I. We left the cafe without a handshake. No hugging, no closure. But as I walked away, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not peace, not forgiveness, but understanding. And maybe, just maybe, that was the first step towards something that resembled healing. I didn't clean the garage door. For 3 days, I left the red letters smeared across the white panel, bold and angry, liar, like a brand on my soul. Neighbors drove past more slowly than usual. One of them offered to help paint over it. I declined, because part of me felt like I deserved it, and another part wanted the world to see it. To see what grief twisted into rage looked like. To see how a lie told by one man could unravel lives and leave a stranger holding the blame. But on the 4th morning, I woke up and decided I was done carrying shame that wasn't mine. I bought paint. I covered the letters. And for the first time in weeks, I looked in the mirror and didn't look away. That same day, I made a decision. If they wanted to make me a villain, I would respond like someone they couldn't define. I would not react. I would not apologize for things I didn't do. I would reclaim my life, one act at a time. I increased the anonymous donations. I transferred money to food pantries, shelters, senior homes. I funded therapy for widows, quietly, silently. I wasn't doing it to redeem myself. I was doing it because giving away pieces of that poisoned inheritance felt like cutting out thorns from my skin. But of course, it didn't take long for word to spread. Helena's daughter posted screenshots from court filings. She's trying to buy forgiveness, one post read. Guilt money, said another. Keep your dirty hands off our father's legacy. Then came the formal court notice. Helena's children were suing me, contesting the will. The grounds? Emotional manipulation, coercion of a vulnerable man, lack of mental capacity. I read the paperwork sitting alone in the same kitchen where William used to bring me tea. They were saying I manipulated him while he was dying, that I pressured him to change his will in my favor, that I isolated him from them on purpose. None of it was true. But truth didn't matter anymore. Perception did. I gave the papers to my lawyer, who assured me the case was flimsy. William's mental health had been intact at the time of the changes. There were doctor's records, witness signatures. Everything had been notarized. Still, I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I stopped opening the curtains, until one morning I found an envelope taped to my door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a photo. Me, outside the post office, captioned in thick marker, "How's the blood money, Maggie?" I dropped it on the floor and walked straight to the sink, vomiting until I shook. I wasn't scared for my life. I was scared of becoming what they said I was. I called my lawyer again. "I want to settle," I said. "You don't need to," he replied. "I know, but I want to." That same afternoon, I called Helena for the second time. She didn't sound surprised. "I've seen what they're doing. she said. I didn't know about the photo. I don't want to fight anymore, I said. I'll divide the estate, not because I owe them, but because I want to be free. There was silence. Then, meet me tomorrow. We met at the same cafe. This time, she looked different, tired still, but warmer, like something inside her had settled. She apologized for the things her children had done, not just the lawsuit, but the hate campaign, the posts, the rumors. They're angry, she said. They don't know what to do with it. I know, I said. Neither did I. We spoke for over an hour. About grief, about betrayal, about motherhood, and the absence of it in my life. Eventually, we reached an agreement, a legal, written, and private settlement. A portion of the inheritance would go into a fund for her grandchildren. Another part would go to a nonprofit in William's name. The rest, I could do what I wanted with it. We walked out of the cafe together this time, still not friends, but no longer enemies. When I got home that night, I stared at the living room walls. For the first time since the funeral, they didn't feel like they were closing in. I still had no husband, no children, no old friends, but I had something better, a door that was beginning to open, and I was finally ready to walk through it. I didn't tell anyone I was moving, not the lawyer, not the neighbors, not even Helena. I needed the quiet. I needed the clean break. Too many people had formed opinions about me based on things they didn't know. Too many faces looked at me with either pity or contempt. There was no in-between, so I packed my life in silence, carefully, methodically. I sold the house William and I had shared, our marital home, as the will called it. I couldn't stay. Every creaking floorboard felt like a lie. Every drawer I opened reminded me of a man who kept drawers just like he kept secrets, tidy, locked, and labeled. I donated most of our furniture, gave away things that no longer felt like mine. I kept only the essentials, photo albums, my mother's teacups, a few books, clothes. I left behind his things, all of them, not out of anger, but because they belonged to another life. I bought a small cottage 2 towns over. It was modest, with a white fence and a maple tree in the front yard. There was no legacy here, no whispers. I was just another woman moving into a quiet street. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. Mornings were filled with birdsong and the distant sound of sprinklers turning on. I started each day with tea on the porch. I didn't check the news, I didn't look at my phone, I just sat, breathing. The first time someone waved at me on the street, a jogger passing by, I flinched, but she smiled, just smiled. No suspicion, no recognition. It felt like a small miracle. I found the local library and offered to volunteer. The director, a woman in her 60s named Ruth, welcomed me with open arms. She didn't ask about my past. She just handed me a box of returned books and said, "Think you can alphabetize these?" I nearly cried. I started helping in the children's reading room on Saturdays. The laughter, the movement, the life. It reminded me that there were still parts of the world untouched by betrayal. I adopted a dog, a mutt from the local shelter, medium-sized, golden with one floppy ear. I named her June, after the month everything fell apart, and the month I chose to rebuild. She followed me everywhere, slept by my bed, watched me with eyes that didn't judge. In time, Helena reached out. She'd heard about the move, asked if I was okay. I told her I was. Then, one Saturday, she came to visit. She brought cookies, not homemade, but from a bakery in her town she said I'd love. We sat on the porch, June at our feet, and talked for hours. Not about William, about books, about the news, about gardening, life. Her visits became monthly, then more frequent. One day she came with her grandchildren. They were shy at first, unsure, but June worked her magic, and by the end of the afternoon, they were playing fetch in my backyard and calling me Miss Maggie. I didn't know how to feel about it. I had never had children, never thought I'd get that title, but hearing it, tentatively, kindly, did something to me I hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of belonging. I didn't try to be anyone's replacement. I didn't offer advice. I just was there, present, patient, and maybe in that stillness, they began to see me as something other than the shadow in their past. I still got mail from old places, still saw articles pop up now and then. People don't let go of scandal easily. But in my new home, I was no longer the woman who inherited a fortune through betrayal. I was the woman who worked at the library, who adopted a shelter dog, who had a neighbor named Ruth and a porch with wind chimes. And in this quiet, gentle life, I started to feel whole again. Not the same woman I was before. That woman was gone. But someone new, someone stronger, someone who had survived the fire and walked out of it with grace. It was a Saturday when it happened. A crisp, sunny morning, the kind where everything feels peaceful, where even the air seems to forgive. I had just returned from the farmer's market, June trotting beside me, when I noticed the envelope on my front step. No return address, no handwriting, just like the one from before. I froze. The last time this had happened, it ended with me retching over my kitchen sink, shaking from fear and shame. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I wouldn't let a sealed envelope take my peace. Still, my hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside were photocopies, documents, legal filings, comments from an online forum, and at the top, one bold sentence in red marker. "You thought we were done?" I didn't need a signature to know who sent it. Helena's son. I had heard through a neighbor that he hadn't taken the settlement well, said his mother had betrayed their father's memory by making peace with me, that she had sold him out for a fund and some apologies. Apparently he'd become obsessed, convinced that William had been coerced. He was scouring old emails, reaching out to former colleagues of William's, and collecting anything he could use to reopen the case. That envelope was his warning. He wasn't done with me. I called my lawyer immediately. He told me to stay calm. Nothing in the papers was new or actionable, but still, just hearing the words out loud again, manipulation, fraud, unlawful influence, it pulled something old and raw back into the light. By Monday, the local news had picked up whispers of the new accusations. Just a blurb, just enough. I stayed indoors for a week. The anxiety returned, wrapping its fingers around my throat like it had in those early days after the funeral. June never left my side. At night, I sat in bed with my laptop closed, trying to keep my hands from shaking. Then, Helena called. "I heard what he's doing," she said. "I'm sorry." I stayed silent. "He's angry," she continued. "But he's not well, Maggie. He's not seeing things clearly. He's trying to destroy me," I said. "No," she said firmly. "He's trying to punish someone because he doesn't know what to do with his grief, and I will not let him use me, or William's ghost, to do that." 2 days later, she showed up at my door. She had called the Attorney General's office herself and filed a statement defending me. She had gone on record. I had not coerced William. He had been clear, sound of mind, and made his choices out of his own guilt, not manipulation. She stood by me, publicly, and when it was time for the hearing, to review whether the case could even be reopened, she sat beside me in the courthouse. Our lawyers spoke. The judge reviewed the evidence. Then, in less than 30 minutes, it was over. Case dismissed. No grounds, no new proof, no reopening. Outside the courtroom, we stood together while reporters shouted questions. I didn't speak. Helena did. "She is not the villain," she said. "She is another victim of the same man who deceived us all. My son needs help, not more pain, and Margaret deserves peace." I cried in the car afterward, not because of relief, but because someone believed me, publicly, fiercely. Later that week, I met Helena at the park. We sat under a large oak tree, watching her granddaughter play on the swings. She handed me a sandwich and said, "You know, I used to think you were the woman who stole my husband." I didn't respond. She smiled gently. "But now I know. We were both just trying to survive the same storm, from different windows." We sat in silence for a while, just breathing. I realized something then. This wasn't the end of the pain, but it was the end of the chase, the end of trying to prove who I was and wasn't to people who had already decided. Let them talk, let them speculate. I had truth, and I had peace, and for the first time since William's funeral, I finally had someone standing beside me when I needed it most. The house I bought was quiet in the kind of way that doesn't feel lonely. It felt earned. The soft hum of the wind through the trees, the occasional bark from June in the backyard, the creak of old floorboards settling beneath me. After everything, I had learned to cherish stillness. I started to build something new. Nothing grand, nothing headline-worthy. Just life. Real, quiet, simple life. Quiet. I joined a community gardening group, signed up for weekly cooking classes at the senior center. I volunteered at the library on Mondays and Fridays, reading to children whose parents were too busy or too tired. No one asked about my past. No one recognized me as that woman. Here, I was just Margaret, Miss Maggie, to some, and I liked it that way. I still got the occasional letter, thinly veiled messages from old acquaintances, former neighbors, sometimes even reporters trying to revisit the story. I tossed them all. They didn't deserve space in this life I was building. Once, Helena came for a weekend. She brought a pie and a photo album. We looked through pictures of William, not the ones I knew, but the ones she did. Birthday parties, school plays, a man in a Halloween costume with his kids in tow. I expected to feel pain, but mostly I felt distance. She asked if I wanted to keep a few pictures. I took one, just one. A candid photo of William laughing with a baby girl on his shoulders. His daughter, the same daughter who once called me a thief. I framed it, put it in the back hallway, not as a shrine to him, but as a reminder of the truth, of the weight of deception, of what it cost everyone. Helena's relationship with her children remained strained. Her son had moved away. Her daughter kept her distance. But slowly, there were small steps. A phone call here, a shared lunch there. I never asked. It wasn't my place. But I saw the effort in Helena's eyes, the mother trying to rebuild a bridge from ashes. And one day, she brought them with her. It was fall, crisp air, leaves swirling like golden confetti. I had set the table outside. A simple meal, roasted vegetables, baked chicken, fresh bread. Helena arrived with her daughter and 2 small children. The same granddaughter I'd seen at the park. And a boy, younger, holding his mother's hand. I was nervous, so was she. But kids are funny. They don't carry the burdens adults do. The little girl ran to June instantly. The boy followed. Helena's daughter, the daughter, stood stiffly at first. Then, after some awkward silence, she looked me in the eye and said, "They call you Miss Maggie at the library." I nodded. "They like you," she added. Her voice was measured, controlled. "They're good kids," I said. We didn't talk about William, or money, or court cases. We talked about school lunches, about the weather, about dogs and books and recipes. Nothing that carried weight, but it was enough. After they left, I sat alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, a cup of tea in hand. The house was still, but not empty. I looked around at the home I had created, the shelves filled with donated books, the garden I'd started to plant, the rug June had claimed as her throne, the laughter that had, briefly, filled the air that afternoon. It didn't replace the past, it didn't erase the betrayal, but it gave me something else, a beginning. And for the first time, I let myself think, maybe I'm not just surviving anymore. Maybe, just maybe, I'm starting to live. The invitation came in a simple card, white with gold trim. Helena's handwriting neat and deliberate. Christmas Eve, dinner, bring June. No pressure, but we'd love to have you. I stared at it for hours, unsure whether to cry or smile. A year ago, I was the woman who had stolen her husband's legacy. Now I was being invited to her family's table. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt fragile. Still, I went. The drive was quiet. Snow lined the roads in soft layers, the world muted in winter's hush. June sat in the back seat, tail thumping every few minutes, her energy a comfort. When I arrived, Helena met me at the door, wrapped in a red sweater, her silver hair pinned back. She hugged me, not stiffly, not out of politeness. It was a real embrace, one that said, "I see you, and I don't resent you anymore." The living room was warm, full of soft music and pine-scented candles. Her grandchildren were already running in circles. Her daughter gave me a small nod from across the room. Not a smile, but not a glare either. And that was enough. Dinner was simple. Roasted turkey, mashed potatoes, vegetables, 2 kinds of pie. We ate, talked, passed plates like we'd done it 100 times. And yet, for me, every moment felt surreal. Halfway through the meal, the little boy, her grandson, turned to me and asked, "Are you really Miss Maggie from the library?" I laughed. "That's what they call me." He nodded, satisfied, then added, "Mom says you read the best stories." I glanced at his mother. Her eyes met mine. And this time, she smiled. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the kids were building a Lego tower near the tree, Helena sat beside me on the couch with a glass of wine. "You know," she said, "last year, I thought this night would never happen. I thought I'd never be able to look at you without anger." I nodded, quiet. "But now," she continued, "when I see you, I don't see betrayal. I see survival. I see grace. I felt my throat tighten. I looked at the tree, the lights, the stockings, this home, this family, so different from mine, so far from what I thought I'd have. And yet, here I was. I never tried to replace you, I whispered. I never even knew I had anything to replace. I know, she said. Now I do. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. Later, just before I left, her granddaughter came up to me with a handmade card, stick figures drawn in marker, one with a gray ponytail, the other with a floppy-eared dog. It said, "To Tia Maggie, Merry Christmas, Tia, Aunt." I stood at the door, card in hand, and my heart broke open. Not from pain, but from the gentlest kind of healing. I had been cast as the outsider, the threat, the thief. But here, in this moment, in this warm, imperfect, complicated room, I had a place, a new family, a new identity, one not built on someone else's secrets, but on my truth, my choices, and the quiet dignity of having endured. And as I drove home that night, snow beginning to fall again, I realized something. I had lost everything I thought mattered, and somehow I had gained something even more real. Spring arrived slowly, gently peeling back the cold from the earth. The maple tree in my front yard sprouted green leaves like tiny promises, and birdsong returned to the mornings. There was peace in the air, an unspoken understanding that some things end so others can begin. I walked June every morning through the neighborhood trails, waving to familiar faces, chatting with the librarian about new releases, helping children pick out books on rainy afternoons. No one whispered about my past here. No one asked about William. They knew me simply as Miss Maggie, the woman who read aloud with too many voices, who always had dog treats in her coat pocket, who smiled even when her eyes sometimes carried shadows. And that was enough. But it wasn't always easy. Sometimes the past came back in small ways, a memory, a photograph tucked in an old book, an article someone forwarded without thinking. Sometimes, at night, I would wake up reaching for a space in bed that no longer belonged to anyone. But the ache was different now. It didn't bleed. It pulsed. Quiet, manageable. I had learned to live with it. One afternoon, I sat on my porch with Helena. We didn't talk much anymore when we met. We didn't need to. The silence between us had shifted from awkward to sacred. We drank tea, watched June roll in the grass, listened to the laughter of her grandchildren in the yard. Her daughter had started coming by more often. Her son, still distant, had written a letter of apology, short but genuine. Healing was never linear, but it was happening. "I think about him sometimes," Helena said, watching the sky. "Not the lies, just the moments, the man he let us see." I nodded. "Me too." We didn't pretend the good erased the bad. We didn't wrap him in forgiveness he hadn't earned, but we acknowledged the pieces he left behind and the strength it took to rise from their ruins. "I'm glad we didn't let him take everything from us," I said quietly. Helena looked at me. He didn't. We still had ourselves, and now we have this, an unlikely bond, born from betrayal but shaped by choice. When she left that day, I stayed on the porch long after the sun dipped low. June rested her head on my foot. The breeze carried the scent of blooming lilacs, the kind my mother used to grow. And I thought about the woman I was a year ago, the woman who stood at a funeral and learned that everything she knew was a lie, the woman who was humiliated, attacked, abandoned, the woman who inherited not just a fortune, but a curse. I had buried that woman, not with spite, with reverence, because she survived. And in her place, I had become someone stronger, someone who didn't need to scream to be heard, someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone, someone who took a broken life and rebuilt it, one quiet, steady brick at a time. I hadn't just found peace. I had claimed it, on my terms, not by revenge, but by outliving the storm, by outlasting the whispers, by choosing to walk in truth when every lie had begged me to crumble. I stood, stretched, and watched the last light disappear behind the trees. Tomorrow would come, as it always did, and I would be ready. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. At Christmas, they said, I ruined the family atmosphere. On New Year's, I sold the country house where they always spent the holidays. If you're watching this, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Eleanor Winters, and this is how I learned to be seen again. The Christmas decorations felt like a charade. I wound the garland around the banister just as Richard and I had done for decades, but my movements were mechanical. 3 months after his funeral, our colonial Connecticut home echoed with silence. I adjusted the angel on top of the tree, her serene face mocking my solitude. Richard would have steadied the ladder, his hand warm against my back. "Careful, Ellie," he would have said. Now there was only the quiet creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. Michael's name flashed on the screen. "Hi, Mom. Just checking in." His voice carried that forced cheerfulness people use with the elderly or infirm. "I was just decorating the tree," I said, trying to sound upbeat. "I'm thinking we should do Christmas at the lake house this year, the way we always have." "About that." A pause, the sound of a door closing. "Let's discuss it later. How are you holding up?" "I'm managing." I straightened a photograph of our family at the lake, Michael and Caroline flanking Richard and me. Grandchildren scattered around us like wildflowers. "That's good. Hey, I need to run. Budget meeting. I'll call you this weekend." "Of course. I understand." But the line had already gone dead. I moved to the kitchen to make tea, the ritual providing small comfort. Through the window, I watched my neighbor Beth hurry past with shopping bags. She'd brought casseroles after the funeral, but hadn't called in weeks. The kettle whistled. I reached for Richard's mug out of habit before catching myself. 1 cup, not 2. 1 saucer, 1 spoon. The math of widowhood was brutally simple. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "Can't talk now. In a meeting. Love you." I scrolled through our recent exchanges, brief, perfunctory, increasingly rare. I dialed her number anyway, needing to hear a familiar voice. "Mom?" Caroline answered, her whisper sharp with irritation. "I'm in the middle of something. I won't keep you. I just wanted to discuss Christmas plans." I thought, hold on. Muffled sounds, then Caroline's voice, not meant for me. "Mom's still not handling it well." My hand tightened around the phone. Who was she talking to? What had I done to warrant such dismissal? "Sorry about that," she returned, voice artificially bright. "Can we talk about this tomorrow? I really need to go." "Of course." I kept my voice steady. "Tomorrow." After hanging up, I wandered into Richard's study. The familiar scent of his cologne still lingered faintly on his leather chair. I ran my fingers along the spines of his books, titles he'd read aloud to me on winter evenings. I pulled an album from the shelf. Our wedding, Caroline's birth, Michael's graduation, Lake House summers, a chronicle of a life spent ensuring everyone else's happiness. In our last photo together, Richard's face was gaunt, but his eyes still crinkled at the corners when he smiled. He'd squeezed my hand that day and whispered, "You'll be all right. Ellie, you're stronger than you know." I closed the album, suddenly aware of a terrible truth. In becoming the silent foundation of our family, I had made myself invisible, and now, in my grief, I was disappearing completely. Michael's Boston home gleamed with tasteful holiday decor, nothing homemade, everything designer selected. I arrived early, carrying my signature sweet potato casserole, the dish Richard had always requested twice. "Oh, Mom." Diana, my daughter-in-law, intercepted me at the kitchen threshold. "You didn't need to bring anything. We have the caterer handling everything." I thought the grandchildren might like, they're all on special diets now. She took the dish and placed it on a counter far from the other food. "But it's sweet of you to try." I watched her rearrange my carefully browned marshmallow topping before turning away. In the living room, my grandchildren were absorbed in their phones, offering distracted hugs without looking up. "Grandma's here," Michael announced, as if declaring a weather pattern that required acknowledgement but no real response. Dinner was a performance of normalcy. I smiled and nodded as conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. When I mentioned the writing class I'd joined at the community center, my eldest grandson glanced at his watch. "That's nice, Mom," Caroline said, in the same tone she'd used when her children brought home kindergarten artwork. I excused myself after dessert, claiming I needed the restroom. Instead, I wandered down the hallway, seeking a moment of quiet. As I approached the kitchen, I heard my children's voices. "We can't do Christmas at the lake house this year," Caroline was saying. "Mom will turn it into a memorial service for Dad. She'll ruin the atmosphere with all that grief." "Agreed." Michael's voice was firm. We need to take control of the situation before she makes the holidays depressing for everyone. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering. Have you spoken to Harrison about the property yet? Caroline asked. Yes, I checked with the family attorney. Surprisingly, the lake house is solely in Mom's name. Dad put it there for their anniversary or something. What? He always told us it would be ours eventually. Well, it will be, but we need to get her to sign it over while she's still, coherent. Caroline laughed. Did you see her looking for her glasses earlier? They were on her head. I've been softening up my contacts at the Vermont Land Conservation Trust, Michael continued, making sure they won't interfere with our plans once we acquire the property. The development potential for that lakefront is incredible. James says we could triple our investment within 5 years. I stepped back, a floorboard creaking beneath my weight. The conversation paused. Is someone there? Michael called. I retreated silently to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at my reflection. The woman looking back seemed smaller, diminished. When had my children started seeing me as an obstacle rather than a person? Later, as Michael drove me back to my hotel, he mentioned casually, Caroline and I were thinking we might try somewhere new for Christmas this year, maybe her place in Aspen. But we've always gone to the lake house, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's our tradition. Traditions change. Mom, Dad's gone now. He patted my hand as if I were a child. It's time to make new memories. I turned to look out the window, hiding my face, not because I was crying, but because for the first time in decades, I felt something unfamiliar burning beneath my grief. Anger. December unfolded like a series of small paper cuts, each one insignificant alone, but collectively unbearable. I called Michael on a Tuesday. His secretary answered, He's in meetings all day, Mrs. Winters. I'll have him call you back. He never did. I texted Caroline about helping with my granddaughter Lily's science project. Thanks, Mom, but we've got it covered, she replied. Lily's working with a tutor now. The real sting came on a snowy Friday when I decided to surprise Caroline with homemade gingerbread cookies, Richard's favorite recipe. I took the train to New York, navigated the subway, and arrived at her apartment building with snow melting in my hair and the cookies still warm in their tin. The doorman called up, and Caroline buzzed me in immediately, which should have been my first clue. Something was wrong. When the elevator opened on her floor, I heard laughter and music spilling from her apartment. Mom! Caroline's smile froze when she saw me. Behind her, a dozen people in festive attire mingled in her elegantly decorated living room. What are you doing here? I brought cookies, I said, lifting the tin like an offering. I should have called first. She took the tin and stepped into the hallway, partially closing the door behind her. You really should have. I'm hosting the department heads from work. I can just drop these off and go. No, come in. Her sigh was almost imperceptible. Just for a minute. Inside, Carolyn introduced me to a silver-haired man in an expensive suit. This is my mother. She's been having a rough time since Dad died. I smiled through the humiliation, excused myself after 15 minutes, and took the long train ride home alone. The following Wednesday, a stranger arrived at my door with a leather portfolio and a practiced smile. Mrs. Winters, I'm Howard Keller, financial advisor. Your son arranged for me to help you organize your affairs. I invited him in reluctantly. Over tea, Howard presented a series of documents outlining simplification strategies for my assets. The lake house in particular, he said, tapping a glossy brochure, represents a significant maintenance burden for someone in your position. We recommend liquidating this asset. My position? I asked. Your age bracket, he clarified smoothly. Managing remote property becomes increasingly challenging. That evening, Michael called. Howard said you seemed resistant to his suggestions. I didn't realize I needed financial management, I said carefully. It's just practical, Mom. The lake house is a lot for someone your age to maintain. After hanging up, I called my old friend Margaret. We drifted apart during Richard's illness, my world shrinking to the dimensions of his needs. Over coffee the next day, she studied me with concern. You look exhausted, Eleanor. I'm fine, I said automatically. No, you're not. She covered my hand with hers. You've spent your entire life accommodating others. Richard was your partner. These children have always seen you as support staff. Her bluntness shocked me. That's a harsh assessment. Is it wrong? She raised an eyebrow. Richard adored you, but even he took for granted that you'd handle everything emotional while he handled everything practical. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream create patterns. It's just how our generation did things. Perhaps, Margaret sipped her tea. By the way, my son mentioned something about development plans for your lake area. Apparently, there's a company buying up properties along that shoreline. Luxury condos, I believe. That night, I sat alone in Richard's study, surrounded by the books and papers he'd left behind. For the first time, I wondered what else he might have left unsaid. The text arrived while I was wrapping presents, each one chosen with careful consideration of the recipient. My phone chimed with Caroline's group message. Change of plans for Christmas. We're gathering at my Aspen condo instead of the lake house. We need a change of scenery this year. The lake house feels too connected to Dad. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Before I could respond, another message appeared from Michael. Great idea. Mom, this will be easier for you too. No memories to trigger grief. I set down the half-wrapped book I'd chosen for Lily, a collection of poetry by the lake author Richard used to read aloud during summer evenings. I was looking forward to the lake house, I typed, then deleted it. Whatever works best for everyone, I sent instead. Michael called an hour later. Mom, we're thinking of your well-being, he said, his lawyer voice in full effect. A mountain retreat will be less triggering than the lake house filled with memories. I appreciate your concern, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded when inside I felt anything but anything. Will Martin know you've canceled? He always prepares the house for our arrival. Martin Crowley had been our caretaker for 15 years, his meticulous attention keeping the property pristine. Don't worry about Martin. We've kept in touch with him. Something in his tone made me pause. You've been in contact with Martin? Just routine maintenance things, Michael said quickly. Listen, I need to run. Diana's waiting for me. After we hung up, I opened my laptop, a gift from Richard last Christmas, when his hands still worked well enough to show me how to use it. You need to join the digital age, Ellie, he teased. I navigated to my granddaughter's Instagram page. Lily rarely posted, but when she did, she often tagged her cousins. I scrolled through recent photos and felt my breath catch. There they were, my grandchildren on the dock of our lake house, the distinctive boathouse visible in the background. The date stamp showed the gathering had happened just 3 weeks ago. More photos followed. A bonfire on our beach, teenagers lounging in our living room, Caroline's husband James raising a wine glass on our porch. The caption read, "Freedom from Grandma's rules." My hands trembled as I clicked through more evidence of their deception. They'd been using my home, enjoying it, partying in it, while systematically excluding me from their plans. I reached for the phone and dialed Martin's number. Mrs. Winters, he sounded genuinely pleased, then hesitant. Is everything all right? Martin, I just saw photos of my family using the lake house, recently. A heavy silence. Mrs. Winters, I thought you knew. Carolyn said you had approved their visits but weren't feeling up to joining them. She said you were too grief-stricken to deal with property matters and that you'd asked her to handle things temporarily. The betrayal settled into my bones like winter cold. I see. I'm so sorry. Martin's distress was palpable. I would never have. It's not your fault, Martin. You were misled. I paused. Thank you for telling me the truth. I hung up and walked slowly to the kitchen. The house Richard and I had shared for 40 years suddenly felt like a museum exhibit, the life of Eleanor Winters before she understood. I made tea, my hands steady despite everything. Sitting at the kitchen table, I let the tears come, not the muffled sobs I'd grown accustomed to since Richard's death, but quiet, cleansing tears that left me strangely calm. When the crying stopped, I went to Richard's desk and removed the letter his attorney had delivered 6 weeks after the funeral, the one I'd been too afraid to open. As if Richard's final words might somehow make his absence more final. It was time. Richard's handwriting, once as bold and straight as the man himself, had grown shaky in his final months. Still, I would have recognized it anywhere. My dearest Ellie, the letter began, if you're reading this, our goodbye came sooner than we hoped. There are things I meant to discuss with you after my heart procedure, but I'm writing this as a precaution. I traced his words with my fingertip, remembering how his hands looked holding a pen, strong and capable, even as illness weakened him. In my study behind the Dickens collection, there's a safe you never knew about. The combination is our wedding date, 07/1643. What you'll find there will be difficult to accept, but you deserve to know. I moved to his study, pulled out the row of leather-bound Dickens, and found the wall safe he'd described. My hands shook as I entered our wedding date. The mechanism clicked, and the door swung open. Inside lay a journal and a manila folder thick with documents. The journal contained Richard's private thoughts pages of increasing concern about financial discrepancies he'd noticed in family accounts. 3 years of entries documented his growing suspicion that James, Caroline's husband, was misappropriating funds from family investments. "I've confirmed that $42,000 is missing from Andrew's college fund," one entry read. "James claims market fluctuations, but I've verified independently that's not possible. I need more evidence before involving Eleanor. She values family peace above all." The final entry, dated 3 days before his fatal heart attack, was the most devastating. "I have sufficient evidence now. Time to tell Ellie everything. This will break her heart, but she deserves the truth about James. I only pray she can forgive me for keeping her in the dark so long." The manila folder contained account statements, transfer records, and correspondence that painted an irrefutable picture. James had been systematically diverting family funds for years. But the deepest cut was a series of emails I found at the bottom of the stack messages between Caroline and a company called Lakeside Development Partners. My daughter had been working as a consultant for developers who wanted to build luxury condos along our lake. Their plans required acquiring all properties on our stretch of shoreline, including our beloved summer home. Caroline stood to earn a substantial commission if the project proceeded. "The only potential obstacle," Caroline had written, "is my mother's sentimental attachment to our family property. My father's recent passing may actually facilitate the acquisition process." I sat back in Richard's chair, letting the documents fall into my lap. The room seemed to spin around me as decades of assumptions crumbled. I had believed my greatest purpose was maintaining family harmony, sacrificing my needs, overlooking slights, accommodating everyone else's preferences. I had prided myself on being the peacekeeper, and all the while, my children had been measuring the dimensions of my life, calculating how to diminish it further for their gain. I returned to Richard's letter, reading his final words. "Ellie, you've always put everyone else first. Maybe it's time to consider what you want. The lake house is in your name alone, my anniversary gift to you 15 years ago. Whatever you decide, know that I've always admired your strength, even when you couldn't see it yourself." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my pocket. Grief still weighed heavily, but something else was rising within me, something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Ruth Goldman's office," answered a familiar voice. "Ruth, it's Eleanor Winters. I need your help." Ruth's office hadn't changed in the 20 years I'd known her leather-bound law books lining the walls, certificates displayed without ostentation, the scent of lemon polish in the air. Ruth herself, now in her 70s, regarded me over reading glasses perched on her nose. "So Michael already checked on the lake house ownership," she confirmed, reviewing her notes. "And you're certain about what you discovered in Richard's safe?" I pushed the folder of evidence across her desk. "I wish I weren't." Ruth examined the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. "This is serious, Eleanor. James could face criminal charges for this level of financial misconduct. And Caroline's involvement with the developers? Not illegal, but certainly a profound conflict of interest." Ruth removed her glasses. "What do you want to do? Confront them directly?" I shook my head. "Not yet. I need to understand all my options first." Ruth nodded, pulled out a file, and confirmed what Michael had discovered. Richard had transferred full ownership of the lake house to me 15 years earlier. "You have complete control over that property," she said. "You can do whatever you want with it." "What about the Vermont Land Conservation Trust? Michael mentioned speaking with them." Ruth's eyebrows raised. "Yes, they've been interested in that lakefront for years. They approached Richard several times about including the property in their watershed protection program. He always deferred, saying the decision should be yours." I sat straighter in my chair. "I'd like to contact them." In the following days, I worked methodically. I documented James's financial misdeeds and Caroline's conflict of interest. I reconnected with Thomas Hayes, a widowed colleague from the university who had always treated me as an equal rather than an extension of Richard. "I've missed our conversations," Thomas said over coffee. "Your insights on Wolf were always more interesting than the department's official position." "I've been invisible for so long," I admitted, even to myself. Thomas introduced me to several community groups where I was welcomed for my own knowledge and experience rather than as Richard's widow. For the first time in months, I felt seen. When Martin called to check in, his voice was still heavy with guilt. "Mrs. Winters, I can't express how sorry I am about the misunderstanding." "Martin," I interrupted gently, "I'm not angry with you, but I would like you to change the locks on the property, citing security concerns, and please let me know immediately if anyone attempts to visit." "Of course," he promised. "May I ask, what are you planning to do with the property?" "Something Richard would have approved of," I said. In mid-November, I contacted Diane Lawson at the Vermont Land Conservation Trust. Our initial conversation was cautious on both sides. "We've been interested in preserving that shoreline for years," Diane explained, "but the process typically takes 9–12 months due to funding requirements, board approvals, and legal work." "What if time is a factor?" I asked. "Unfortunately, even with a motivated seller, our hands are tied by our funding cycles." I thanked her and hung up, disappointed but not deterred. Ruth had helped me develop a strategy that didn't depend on quick action. I could afford to wait. That evening, Thomas invited me to a chamber music concert. "You mentioned Richard loved Schubert," he said. "I thought you might enjoy this performance." At intermission, standing in the concert hall lobby, I caught my reflection in a mirror. The woman looking back seemed different, still grieving, yes, but no longer diminished. There was purpose in her eyes, a straightness to her shoulders I hadn't seen in months. My phone buzzed with a calendar alert. Aspen, Christmas Eve. I would attend as planned, playing the role they expected, the slightly forgetful, easily dismissed grandmother. But I would be watching them with new eyes, seeing not who I wished they were, but who they had shown themselves to be. Caroline's Aspen condo gleamed with minimalist holiday decor, white lights, silver ornaments, not a hint of the homemade decorations that had defined our family celebrations. I arrived bearing carefully wrapped gifts and my mother's fruitcake recipe, playing my expected role. "Mom, you didn't need to bring food," Caroline said, taking the cake and setting it aside without a second glance. "We have a chef preparing everything." "Old habits," I smiled, handing my coat to the waiting staff member. Michael arrived with Diana and their children, his arm around my shoulder slightly too tight, his voice slightly too loud. "Mom looks great, doesn't she? Doing so well, considering everything." I watched them all, my family, through this new lens of awareness. The way Caroline and Michael exchanged glances when I mentioned the writing class I'd joined, how they smoothly steered conversation away from any mention of the lake house, the performance of affection that never quite reached their eyes. "The atmosphere feels so much lighter this year, doesn't it?" Caroline remarked over dinner, looking pointedly at me. "Yes," I agreed mildly. "It does feel different." James dominated the conversation with investment talk, his confidence unshaken, despite what I now knew. When he mentioned family legacy planning, Michael shot him a warning glance. "Speaking of planning," Michael interjected, refilling his wine glass, "we should discuss some practical arrangements before everyone leaves tomorrow." "Let's save business for after the holidays," Diana suggested, and I caught a note of tension in her voice I hadn't noticed before. "Excellent idea," I said, patting her hand gratefully. Later, as everyone gathered in the living room, I excused myself, claiming fatigue from travel. "You all stay up and enjoy yourselves. I'll see you in the morning." In the guest room, I sat at the small desk and opened my laptop. A new email had arrived from Diane Lawson at the Vermont Land Conservation Trust. "Mrs. Winters, I'm writing with unexpected news. An anonymous donor with strong environmental interests has stepped forward, offering immediate funding specifically earmarked for your lake property. This unprecedented development could allow us to complete the transaction by March rather than waiting until next fall. If you're still interested, we should discuss details as soon as possible." I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This changed everything. Instead of a prolonged strategy spanning months, I could act decisively before spring. I walked to the window and looked out at the snowy mountains, remembering countless Christmas Eves at the lake house, Richard stoking the fire, grandchildren hanging stockings, the reflection of colored lights dancing on the water. Those memories would always be mine, regardless of what happened to the property itself. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt not just grief, but anticipation. Tomorrow would bring pain, certainly, but also, finally, truth. I replied to Diane's email with trembling fingers. "I am very interested. Let's move forward as quickly as possible." Then I prepared the envelopes I would distribute after dinner tomorrow, each containing identical letters explaining my decision. I sealed them carefully, wrote each family member's name on the front, and placed them in my handbag. As I climbed into bed, I realized I felt neither vindictive nor sad, just unburdened, like someone who has finally set down a weight they never should have carried. Outside, snow began to fall, covering Aspen in a blanket of white. I watched it gather on the window ledge, thinking of Richard's words. "I've always admired your strength, even when you couldn't see it yourself. I see it now," I whispered to the empty room. Christmas morning arrived with forced cheer and materialistic excess. Designer wrapping paper carpeted Caroline's living room floor as the grandchildren tore through packages containing the latest electronics and branded clothing. I distributed my own modest gifts, hand-knitted scarves for the grandchildren, leather-bound journals for Michael and Caroline, a delicate silver bracelet for Diana. With each gift, I included a sealed envelope. "Something special," I explained. "A tradition your father and I had planned before he passed, but please don't open them until after dinner." Throughout the day, I noticed the small dismissals I had previously rationalized away. How Michael cut me off mid-story about Richard's first Christmas with us. How Caroline sighed, almost imperceptibly, when I offered to help in the kitchen. How my grandchildren's attention slid past me like water off glass. At dinner, James poured expensive wine, while Michael raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, with a meaningful glance at Caroline, "and to practical arrangements that benefit everyone. To family," I countered, lifting my own glass, "and to honesty." After dessert was served, Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, we wanted to discuss the lake house situation. We've been thinking." "Actually," I interrupted gently, "I believe it's time to open those envelopes I gave you." A curious silence fell as they retrieved the sealed envelopes from pockets and side tables. I watched their faces as they read the identical letters inside. Michael spoke first, his voice dangerously quiet. "What is this?" "Exactly what it says," I replied. "I've signed a letter of intent to sell the lake house to the Vermont Land Conservation Trust. The closing is scheduled for March. I'm donating half the proceeds to a grief support foundation in Richard's name." Caroline's face flushed crimson. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious," I said. After learning about the lakefront development plans, I paused, watching her eyes widen in recognition. "I contacted the trust. They've been interested in preservation for years. The property will become protected parkland, preventing any development." Michael's lawyer persona snapped into place. "This is nowhere near market value," he argued, though he hadn't seen the offer. "And a letter of intent isn't binding. We can still fix this." "Fix what, exactly?" I asked. "My decision to determine the fate of my own property?" "You had no right," Caroline's voice rose sharply. "That property was meant for all of us." "Actually," I said, remaining calm, "I had every right, and if you'd bothered to consult me instead of planning behind my back, you might have learned that." The room went deathly quiet. James cleared his throat. "I think we all need to take a step back." "I agree," I said, reaching into my handbag for the folder of evidence I'd brought. "There's more you should know." One by one, I laid out the documents Richard had compiled, the financial records showing James's systematic misappropriation of family funds, including the children's education accounts, the emails revealing Caroline's deal with the developers, Richard's journal entries documenting his growing concern and his intention to confront them. "Your father discovered this before he died," I said quietly. "He was waiting for the right moment to address it. That moment never came." James's face had gone pale. "These records are taken out of context. I was merely reallocating funds temporarily." "Stop," Diana's voice cut through his excuses. She was staring at a statement showing withdrawals from her children's accounts. "Just stop." Michael, in full damage control mode, gathered the papers into a pile. "This isn't the time or place. We'll discuss everything rationally after the holidays." Caroline stood abruptly. "I can't believe you would do this to us." She grabbed her coat. "James, we're leaving." As they stormed out, the remaining family members dispersed in uncomfortable silence. Only Diana lingered, studying me with new eyes. "How long have you known about all this?" she asked quietly. "Long enough," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I've suspected something was off with James's investments for a while." Michael wouldn't listen. She hesitated. "I'm sorry, Eleanor, for how we've treated you. I should have seen it sooner." After she left, I sat alone in Caroline's immaculate living room, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and abandoned gifts. I felt no triumph, no vindication, only the quiet certainty that comes from finally speaking truth. The explosive aftermath of Christmas unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. Caroline and James returned to the condo only to pack their things, departing without another word. Michael, drawing on his legal background, immediately began questioning the validity of my agreement with the Conservation Trust. "They've taken advantage of a vulnerable widow," he insisted, pacing Caroline's living room. "This is nowhere near market value." "Have you seen the offer?" I asked mildly. "I don't need to. Lakefront property in Vermont, they're getting it for a song. Perhaps I value things differently than you do." Michael's jaw tightened. "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Grief does things to people's judgment. Does it cause them to manufacture financial records, to create false email trails, to doctor account statements?" I kept my voice even. "Because that's what you're suggesting your father did." His face flushed. "That's not... I'm saying you're misinterpreting." "I'm not misinterpreting anything," I said firmly. "I've had the financial records independently verified. The Conservation Trust has made a fair offer based on multiple professional appraisals, and unlike some, they've been completely transparent about their intentions for the property." "This is absurd." Caroline had returned to the living room, her face blotchy with anger. "You're punishing us because you feel neglected. This is emotional manipulation." "Interesting accusation," I replied, coming from someone who told the caretaker I was too grief-stricken to handle property matters, while using my home for parties behind my back. "It wasn't like that," she protested, but her eyes slid away from mine. "It was exactly like that. Just as it was exactly like James diverting funds from the children's education accounts. Just as it was exactly like you consulting for developers who wanted our property without disclosing your conflict of interest." James stepped forward, his salesman's charm deployed at full strength. "Eleanor, there have been some misunderstandings in the financial records. Market fluctuations can appear suspicious to the untrained eye." "Richard had a very trained eye," I interrupted, "as do the forensic accountants Ruth has consulted." The room went silent at the mention of accountants. Michael and James exchanged alarmed glances. "You've involved outside accountants?" Michael asked, his voice strained. "Not yet," I replied. "That depends on what happens next." Diana had been quiet throughout the confrontation, but now she stood. "I think we all need time to process this." She turned to Michael. "We should pack. Our flight leaves early." As they dispersed to gather their belongings, Caroline remained, her anger cooling into calculation. "So this is your revenge? Destroying family harmony over perceived slights?" "This isn't revenge, Caroline. It's consequence. There's a difference." "Dad would be ashamed of how you're handling this," she said, a final attempt to regain control. I smiled sadly. "Your father left very clear instructions about what he wanted me to know. I think he would be proud that I finally stood up for myself." Later, as most of the family departed for the airport, Diana approached me privately. "Eleanor, I want you to know I had no idea about any of this. The investment accounts, the lake house schemes, Michael keeps financial matters to himself." "I believe you," I said, "and I'm sorry you've been caught in the middle." "No," she shook her head firmly. "I'm sorry I didn't see how they were treating you. I've suspected something was off with James's investments for a while. Michael wouldn't listen when I raised concerns." I reached out and squeezed her hand. "We all have blind spots when it comes to family." "What will you do now?" she asked. "Go home. Move forward. Hope that eventually we can find a way to rebuild on honest ground." Diana nodded. "I hope so too." January arrived with a silence deeper than winter itself. I returned to Connecticut and changed my phone number, giving the new one only to Ruth, Thomas, and a few trusted friends. The inevitable messages came through Ruth's office, first angry, then manipulative, eventually pleading. Michael sent a formal letter threatening legal action to block the sale, claiming I had been coerced by the Conservation Trust. He hired Preston Wallace, a prominent estate attorney known for aggressive tactics. "He's requesting a mental competency evaluation," Ruth informed me during our weekly call. "Schedule it immediately," I replied. "The sooner we address this, the better." The evaluation, conducted by a respected neuropsychologist, confirmed what I already knew. My cognitive function was excellent. "Mrs. Winters displays exceptional clarity and cognitive abilities," the report concluded. Wallace then attempted to argue that the trust had taken advantage of my grief, but backed down when Ruth presented evidence of the fair market valuation and documentation of the trust's long-standing interest in the property. The final blow to Michael's legal challenge came during a conference call that included Wallace, Michael, and Ruth. My client has additional family matters she's chosen not to make public at this time, Ruth stated calmly. She would prefer those matters remain private. The threat of exposing James's financial improprieties and Caroline's conflict of interest hung in the air. The legal maneuvers ceased within days. Instead of dwelling on their betrayal, I focused on moving forward. I rejoined the community board I'd left during Richard's illness. I enrolled in literature courses at the local college. I rearranged our home to better suit my needs rather than preserving it as a shrine to the past. Thomas became a steady presence in my life, accompanying me to concerts and lectures, engaging me in intellectual discussions I had missed during Richard's illness. Our friendship deepened naturally, without pressure or expectation. When neighbors inquired about my family, I answered honestly, "We're going through a necessary adjustment period." Ruth brought news that James had quietly begun repaying funds to the family accounts. "He's hoping to avoid formal investigation," she explained. "Caroline's developer has pulled out of the lakefront project without her commission. Your decision inspired other neighbors. Several are now in talks with the Conservation Trust. These consequences provided a measure of justice, though they hadn't been my primary goal. What mattered most was reclaiming my own agency after decades of putting everyone else first." One Tuesday morning, the phone rang a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Grandma, it's Lily." My youngest granddaughter's voice brought an unexpected surge of emotion. "Lily, how are you, sweetheart?" "I'm okay," she hesitated. "I got your number from Mrs. Crowley Martin's wife. I hope that's all right." "Of course it is. I'm happy to hear from you." "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she rushed on, "for not standing up for you at Christmas, and for using the lake house without telling you. Mom said you knew, but I should have checked directly with you." The simple acknowledgement meant more than elaborate apologies from her parents would have. "Thank you, Lily. That means a great deal to me. Could we maybe get coffee sometime? Just us?" she asked tentatively. "I'd like that very much." After we hung up, I sat with the revelation that while relationships with my children might remain strained, perhaps connections with my grandchildren could be salvaged on more honest terms. That evening, Thomas called to invite me to dinner. "Nothing fancy," he assured me. "Just two old friends and good food." As I dressed for dinner, I noticed my reflection in the mirror, still Eleanor, still grieving, but no longer diminished. The woman looking back at me had found her voice again. 6 days after Christmas, I hosted a small New Year's Eve gathering, not family, but my circle of friends from the community center and university. Thomas arrived early to help arrange chairs and prepare hors d'oeuvres, his quiet competence reminiscent of Richard's, yet distinctly his own. "I wasn't sure you'd feel like celebrating," he admitted as we arranged a cheese board. "I'm not celebrating the past year," I clarified. "I'm welcoming the new one." As guests arrived, I found myself engaged in conversations about books, politics, and local initiatives discussions where my opinions were solicited and valued. No one spoke to me with the careful condescension my children had adopted. No one treated my grief as an inconvenience or my age as a liability. During a lull in conversation, I checked my email and found a message from Diana. "Eleanor, what happened at Christmas only confirmed doubts I've had for years. The way Michael handled this situation, threatening legal action against his own mother, questioning your competence, prioritizing property over family. I've asked for a separation. I want you to know I'm sorry for my role in marginalizing you. I hope we might have a relationship independent of Michael." I responded immediately, thanking her for her honesty and expressing hope for her future, whatever shape it might take. Later, my phone chimed with a text from Lily. "Happy New Year? Grandma, looking forward to our coffee date next week." This was followed by hesitant messages from 2 other grandchildren suggesting the family narrative might be shifting. As midnight approached, I excused myself briefly and walked through my home, the home Richard and I had shared for 40 years. In each room, memories lingered like familiar scents. Richard carving a turkey in the dining room, reading by the fire in the living room, falling asleep with reading glasses perched on his nose in our bedroom. I touched the doorframe of his study, where I had discovered the truth that changed everything. "I miss you," I whispered, "but I think you'd be proud of me." Returning to my guests for the countdown, I accepted a champagne flute from Thomas, who studied me with warm eyes. "You seem lighter somehow," he observed. "I am," I confirmed. I finally put down a burden I never should have carried. As we counted down the seconds to midnight, I felt not just the weight of what I had lost, but the possibility of what might still be gained. The year ahead held uncertainty, but also promised the promise of living on my own terms, of relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, of being seen for who I truly was rather than what I could provide. At midnight, glasses clinked and cheers erupted. Thomas leaned close. "To new beginnings," he said quietly. "To truth," I replied, touching my glass to his, "and to whatever comes next." By mid-March, 7 months after Richard's passing, winter's grip on Connecticut had begun to loosen. The sale of the lake house to the Vermont Land Conservation Trust was complete. The proceeds divided between my account and the Grief Support Foundation established in Richard's name. Diana had called regularly since January, our relationship evolving into something more genuine than before. Several of my grandchildren had reached out independently, including Michael's son Andrew, who was now investigating discrepancies in his college fund with his father's reluctant assistance. I sat in a coffee shop near Columbia University, where I'd been auditing a course on women writers of the 20th century. The bell above the door chimed, and Caroline entered, her confident stride faltering slightly when she saw me. This was our first meeting since Christmas. "Mom," she said, sliding into the chair across from me, "thank you for agreeing to see me." I nodded, taking in the changes 3 months had wrought the shadows beneath her eyes, the absence of her usual polished veneer. "How are you, Caroline?" "I've been better." She placed a cream envelope on the table between us, not a legal document or financial statement, but a handwritten letter. "I wanted to give you this, and to tell you in person that James has moved out. We're separating." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Don't be. He claims he was only borrowing from the accounts." Her voice hardened. "But I can't trust him anymore." She hesitated. "The development deal collapsed, which is actually a blessing in disguise. It's forced me to reconsider a lot of things. I didn't rush to forgive or absolve her. That would come with time, if at all. Instead, I asked, "Why did you want to meet today?" Caroline pushed the envelope toward me. "To give you this, and to invite you to Lily's school play next week. She specifically asked for you to be there." I accepted both the letter and the invitation, recognizing them as small first steps on a long road. "We'll need to rebuild slowly," I told her, "on equal footing." She nodded, understanding the terms. Later that week, I visited the now public lakefront park, where a small plaque honoring Richard's memory had been installed. Michael met me there, having driven up from Boston at my request. We walked along the familiar shoreline in silence before he spoke. "Your actions forced me to confront what truly matters," he admitted. "I spent so much time chasing status that I forgot how to be a son, and I forgot how to be more than just a mother," I replied. "We both have learning to do." He mentioned that his legal firm was handling the formal investigation into James's financial mismanagement. "I'm personally ensuring all misappropriated funds are recovered," he said, a small step toward accountability. Martin, now employed by the trust to maintain the public space, greeted us warmly. He introduced me to Diane Lawson and several neighbors who thanked me for my role in preserving the natural beauty of the lake. "You started something important here," Diane told me. "This entire shoreline will now be protected for generations." As Michael and I prepared to leave, he asked hesitantly, "Do you think we can ever get back to how things were?" I shook my head. "No, but perhaps we can build something more authentic in its place." The final Sunday in March found me hosting dinner at my Connecticut home. Diana and Lily were present, along with 2 other grandchildren who had reached out independently. Michael and Caroline had both promised to attend the next gathering, though I harbored no illusions about quick healing. Thomas arrived with dessert, our long friendship now deepening into something more 7 months after Richard's passing. The timing felt right, not a replacement for what I'd lost, but a new chapter on its own terms. As we gathered around the table, I realized that my greatest act of courage wasn't standing up to my children's betrayal, but opening myself to joy again afterward. The path forward wouldn't be smooth, but it would be mine to determine. "Richard would be proud of you," Thomas whispered as we cleared dishes together. "No," I corrected him with a small smile. "I'm proud of me." I looked around at this imperfect gathering, not the family I had once imagined, but perhaps the one I needed now. The bonds were fragile, the trust tentative, but real healing had begun, not because I had demanded it or manipulated others into providing it, but because I had finally honored my own worth. After a lifetime of keeping peace at any cost, I had discovered that true harmony could only be built on honesty. It was a lesson learned late, but not too late. Never too late. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.